Begin the current Daf Mesechtes Bava Metzia Daf Mem Zayin, and begin on the bottom line of Mem Vav Mabez, where the Gemara continues on this theme that we're discussing on these dafim regarding the different types of kinyonim. As we open up this parak Hazav, regarding Hazav Kainis Akesef, we spoke about the kinyan that works, kinyan that doesn't work, kinyan of a matbeya of kesef that doesn't work. But if you do Mashicha on the item, it's going to work. And then we introduced also the kinyan of chalipin, that the transfer of a symbolic item will also create a kinyan. The Gemara continues on the related halachas regarding the kinyan of chalipin. Should be schus, of course, for the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael and throughout the entire world. Some of the discussed in today's daf are: what's if you're doing a kinyan of damim, which is regarding a payment, but ve'ein makber aleim. However, the person is not particular about how much the value is. What's the halacha of that kinyan? And the reverse. What happens if chalipin, which is generally something that you're not particular, it's just a symbolic type of a kinyan, just give me like a kerchief, and everyone's going to do it their chametz, like we said with the Rav, but umakber aleim, particular to know the value of that object. What's the halacha regarding that kinyan? The machlekes regarding when you're doing chalipin, so you give this symbolic item, who gives to who? There's a machlekes in the Gemara. Is it Kaleb Shalkaina? Is it the buyer that gives to the seller the item, or it's actually Kaleb Shamakna? It's the seller that actually gives to the buyer. Simon, we mentioned in the Mishnah, the Gemara explains what exactly is this coin that is considered as the mekach and not as the kesef, as the mois. The Gemara brings a machlekes regarding this halacha that we open up in this parak of Azav, that we said that hakesef in a koines Azav, because it's mois, it's the money, and money does not create a kinyan. So the Gemara brings the machlekes finally that is it because Meshicha and Mufareshes min HaTorah that actually you need Meshicha and mois min HaTorah doesn't work, or no, actually Dvar Torah mois koines biblically money works, but there's a takanas chachamim not to allow money to create the kinyan. And then the Gemara discusses the machlekes in our Mishnah between the Tanna Kamma and Rabbi Shimon regarding who could back out. And the question is, do we say just like they instituted that regarding the seller that we required Meshicha, and that is either one of them could back out until Meshicha is done. So begin the current Daf Mem Vav Mabez, the bottom line on the Amid. There's two types of kinyonim that we're talking about. There's a mecher, a sale, and the item is not acquired through payment, and then there's chalipin in exchange. And both items are acquired through Meshicha on either object. As soon as one person took and acquired one of the items, the other acquires the other item. So the Gemara introduces Amar Rabba Amar Ravuna. He says, what happens if someone's holding in his hand money? He tells his friend like this. He says, Machar, he's holding a bag of money, says, sell me your object, be'elu, with these monies in my hand. Now, the guy wasn't particular to ask how much money was in that bag, and he takes it from the hand of the buyer. Says Rav Huna, Kana, the buyer acquires the object with these monies, and neither one of them could back out. Now, moreover, as the Gemara continues up in Zayin Med Aleph, the Yeshloi, now, the other person, the seller, has a love on the buyer, a halacha of oina, meaning if the monies don't have the amount of the value of the object, and it's a sixth less of the value, he can tell him, as we'll see later on, this halacha of oina on a later daf, that he could demand the return of his money because it was defrauded by a sixth. So the Gemara explains this halacha. There's two parts to this halacha. First of all, kana. The buyer is going to acquire the object, which is a chiddush, because avagav delei mashach, even though he didn't draw the object himself. Didn't we say that giving money is not an acquisition? How is Rav Huna saying that giving him the bag of money, no one could back out anymore? Oh, so the Gemara explains. The kivin delei kapid, since the seller wasn't particular about how much money it was, Kana is going to acquire this, the buyer, because the chalipin dummy. It's like chalipin, We're just like chalipin, exchanging any one of the two items, even the symbolic kerchief creates a kinyan. It's a different type of a kinyan. It's not a damim kinyan. Here also, the money is not really a kinyan of damim because you didn't care to know the price, the how much money you're getting. So we're going to look at the bag of the money like a kerchief. It's no less than a kerchief. Later on, the Gemara is going to ask that Ula, and this is where it comes back to the previous daf, doesn't hold that you could do chalipin with a matbeya. This is what we had been discussing in the previous daf, and that's where the Gemara is introducing this. So how could you say that the money bag will be a chalipin, but he doesn't hold that you could do chalipin with money? But that's what the Gemara says. That's the first half of the halacha. So interestingly, the money will work in this case because it's like a chalipin, because you're not really counting how much the money is. And the second half of the halacha, which is actually machlokes in this Gemara, v'yesh le'alav ayna. Now he also, however, has halacha ayna, which is a chiddush. Now that you told me it's like chalipin, which obviously there's no ayna on a kerchief when the guy's giving him a car or whatever, because the machali be'elu kamalei. He told him, sell it to me for this bag of money, which is a terminology of a memker, which by sale there is ayna, and it's not a terminology of a chalipin. So it's like straddling these two halachas. On the one hand, it's like a chalipin in the sense that it's going to be a kinyan, even though he didn't do mashicha on the object. But at the same time, there will be ayna of a fraud of a sixth, if it's a sixth off, because ultimately he told him, sell it to me, and therefore it'll have the halachas of mechir. That's one version. And this was the opinion of Rabbi named Rabbi Rav Huna. However, Rab Abba Amar Rav Huna, also both in the name of Rav Huna, he says it differently. He says, yes, the first half is the same. Machali be'elu kana. He says, sell it to me with this money bag. So just by giving over the money bag kana, the acquisition happens. But he holds v'ein lo yelav ayna. There is no halacha of ayna because ultimately it's like a chalipin, because you didn't ask how much it is, and therefore it's just like a symbolic change. And therefore, even if it's more than a sixth off, you can't demand your money back. Now, the Gemara explains this teaching of Rav Huna. They're both in the name of Rav Huna, they just disagreed regarding the Ainah part. Pshita says the Gemara, it's obvious that damim. So let's discuss another case, says the Gemara. So if, let's say, he gives him money or an object because of some other object in the medium of a monetary exchange, Ve'ein makbid alehen, and he wasn't particular to see, is the money the value of the object that I'm selling him? So Hakaminan, that we just said, says the Gemara, the kinyan will happen without Mashiach, as we described, because the Kachlip and Damu, the Gemara is just establishing the premise for the next question. We said, because it's like Chalipin, you didn't ask how much it is. But I have a question, says the Gemara, of the other way. What happens if Chalipin, let's say he gives him one object for another object through the medium of exchange, to acquire, just like you would acquire with a kinyan of a sudar of a kerchief. But umakbid aleim, he's particular to see, let me see this kerchief. Is this Turkish silk? What is this kerchief that you're giving? He wants to know the value of it. What would the halacha be? Would you say that both of them will acquire their respective objects, their opposite objects, when one of them does mashiach, or maybe no? Since he was particular to know, how much is this kerchief worth? So now, let's do the same thing we did in the first case, the opposite way. Let's say, well, that's like a damim. That's like it's like ma'os, because you want to know the value. You want to know, is this a good exchange? So then maybe you shouldn't inquire until the other guy does mashicha on the second item, because the kerchief, you're looking at it as money. Because you're particular to say, well, how much is this? You realize the thing I'm giving you is worth this amount. How much is this kerchief you're giving me? So it says the Gemara, would you say the same thing in the reverse too? So he says, Tashim al-Tpinga Raya from the following brisa. The brisa says, a guy is holding on to his cow, and he's standing there. And his friend comes along and he tells him, why your cow? Well, Rashi explains a little bit more, adds some words. Why do you bring your cow to the marketplace? He says, look, I need a donkey. I have to travel, this cow it's got to come to good use to buy myself a donkey. He says, look, he says, I got a donkey that I can give you. How much is your cow? He said, I'll be willing to sell my cow for this amount. And then the guy says back to him, how much would you sell your donkey for? He says, Bekach, bekach, this and this amount. Okay, so they agree on the price. Moshech bala chamar esapar. So if the owner of the donkey drags the cow as a kinyan of Meshicha, but the owner of the cow didn't get a chance to do Meshicha on the donkey. And the donkey dies. The owner of the donkey does not acquire the cow. Now, this is difficult because he already did, this is a chalipin, and he already did Meshicha on the, and especially if it would be a sale, he did Meshicha on the cow already. So he should have been acquired it, and then automatically it should have been, the donkey should have been to the other person. Now it died in the owner of the cow, the original cow owners. It was his donkey the moment the Meshicha was done. Why is it that the owner of the donkey did not acquire the cow? Says the Gemara, oh, Shema Mina. This is the case we're discussing. Obviously, Chalipin umakber alein. Although this is a chalipin, this is an exchange. You give me your cow, I give you my donkey. But they were particular. It says, how much is your cow? How much is your donkey? So although it's an exchange, it's like damim. So therefore, loikana. So you're not going to be kind of by just giving one of the items, because when you give the first item, that's like the monetary payment. The other guy's got to go ahead now and do Meshicha on the other item to finalize the sale. So on that, says the Gemara, Rabbi says, no, it's not a raya. Because atu chalipin, you think by the biblical chalipin. Right. It seems like that maybe you wouldn't know, and the second one would be automatically. No, it doesn't seem like that. It seems like that it wouldn't. It doesn't. The Gemara doesn't tell us, but it seems like maybe that you would assume that the first one is the money, or you wouldn't know, and you would have to do the whole kinyan. Could be. Yeah, it doesn't sound like a cow versus a donkey more. Right. So the Gemara says, no, it's not a raya, because you think when the pasuk talks about chalipin b'shuftin yaskinan, that we're talking about fools, the loikapti, that they're not particular to know that it's worth some value, that it should find favor in his eyes to give his object correlating, and even so the pasuk is saying that he's going to acquire. No, ela kol chalipin mikbad kapti. Every time a person does chalipin, the person's particular, like a sale, to know, as Taisus, the top Taisus says, that it should have some value. And sometimes he wants to know that it's equal to the object himself. And even though it's not exactly, but a person wants to know. In other words, don't make this into like a whole, like, Kinyan Damim, because the guy wants to know how much is it. No, every chalipin yamakbid bakana. So then, wait a second. Each one, yeah, I hear. Right. So then, if each one's a payment, then what's the kinyan then? So then you have to do another kinyan. No, but you're saying each one is not a machine. Each one's like each one paying the other one. Right. So maybe that's what I'm saying. If you do both, whatever. So the Gemara says, okay, but so wait a second. So the Gemara is saying, don't mix me up. The Gemara is saying, because the guy's makbid doesn't make it like you're asking a question over here. You're doing chalipin and he wants to know the price, like you're transferring it into a mechira. Not so fast. It can still be a chalipin, even if he wants to know, because even a regular chalipin, the guy wants to know that there's some type of value to this kerchief. Fine. So then, how do we understand this brisa then? The brisa was making it sound like that because he asked him and he's particular, then the chalipin doesn't happen. Then why doesn't the chalipin happen right away? It's a chalipin. So why, when one guy gave him the cow, didn't the kinyan automatically happen that now the donkeys and the other guys are shus? Says the Gemara, no, this is a very different case over here. The Amalei, it's chaser, but the Gemara is adding on another variable. He told him, I'll give you my chamor bepara v'teleh. Only if you give me a cow and a lamb. A shepsela mitdiki. That's the case. Umashach has a para, and you're right. The owner of the donkey did Mashiach on the par, but Vadayin Mashach has atleh. He didn't do Mashiach on their sheep yet. Mashiach Malya. So that's not a bona fide Mashiach, because he didn't do on both of the items. That's why, like a very simplistic, the Gemara adds on another variable and says, that's it. That's why it didn't work. But the fact that they were particular to ask kama kach v'kach, that's not a reason to make it that it wouldn't work, and it wouldn't work because the fact that you asked is not a grace. It doesn't turn it into a mechira because you're makbid to know how much it's worth. Right. Yeah, l'chayr, you have to do whatever it is that you're being kind of. I'm saying, but that wouldn't work as a kinyan then for the rest. L'chayr, I'm saying, how could that be kaina? Whatever it is that you're taking, that has to. Then you would have to make a different kinyan. I'm saying that because how could that? It's not a symbolic. Mashiach is actual drawing into your possession. So the Gemara goes back to discuss. We had the first version of Rabbah in the name of Rav Huna, that he said, Mocherli be'elu. Again, this original case that we discussed. The guy tells him he's holding a money bag. He says, "Sell it to me for this amount." So Kani acquires. But we said he still has halacha of price of defrauding if it's more than the sixth. Says the Gemara, but wait a second. Leima savar Rav Huna, shall we say Rav Huna holds matbeya nasa chalipin? We said on the previous daf that Ula holds, and all the other opinions held like him also, that money cannot be used to create chalipin. But you told me that the understanding of Rav Huna's halacha was because it's like a chalipin. That's why there's a kinyan going to happen, because if it's damim, how a money bag shouldn't work because it's money. Money, we said, mois in the kindness. So shall we say that Rav Huna holds that that mois are you can make a chalipin with? Says the Gemara, no. Truth is, and the Gemara has an interesting answer. Rav Huna savalok Rabbi Yechanan. He holds like Rabbi Yechanan. In other words, the matbeya is not creating the chalipin, and these are not really chalipin. These are damim, because he said machrali, sell it to me. But money like this case would acquire it at Mashiach because it's like chalipin of a kinyan sudar, but it's not that it's actually a chalipin. It's like chalipin because it's an uncommon type of a sale, which was what we mentioned this idea in the previous daf. The Amar Rabbi Yechanan said, according to biblical halacha, mois kindness. Really, money does acquire. Just giving the money, you acquire the object. Why did they say that you only could be acquiring with Mashiach by pulling the object that is being bought? It's a gezer, it's a rabbinic decree. Shema yomerloi, maybe might tell him, the seller might tell the buyer, your wheat that you didn't pick up yet, you paid for it, but it was in the upper story, it got burnt. Oh, so milsa the shchicha gazi b'rabbanan. We know in general rabbinic law would only make a gezeira on something that's common. So a common sale, which a guy would pay and he doesn't pick it up right away, would be a common thing to be concerned for. But a milsa lo shchicha, like the sale that we're discussing over here, where the guy doesn't even know how much money is in the bag. That's a very uncommon thing that a person should do such a thing. It's like, I have this Amazon truck. How much you want? They just, I'll pay you $5,000. Like you don't even know what's in there. So it's not a common thing. It's pasha because there's no rabbinic decree in the uncommon case. That's why the Rav Huna said, then this guy, what he has, you want to buy for however you want to sell it to me for how much money I have in this bag. He says, yes, it'll work by giving him the money because it's a Muslim shchicha, and that's why the kinyan is going to work. Now, Amalei Marhuna Bered Rav Nachman Rav Ashi, he says, Atun Hochim Asnitula. You learned the teaching of Rav Huna that you weren't sure, as like the Gemara just went through like a discussion, if he holds that a matbeya could create a chalipin, and if not, and then you gave like a rejected and said, no, not necessarily, could be he holds that matbeya cannot create a chalipin, and it's not really chalipin, it's a kinyadam. But Anani says, we explicitly learned Rav Huna with the Rabbanan that we discussed on the previous daf, that say clearly, V'chein Amar Rav Huna is one of those is quoted, that ein matbeya nasa chalipin, a money cannot be used to create a halachic transfer, and we didn't have any doubt at all, because most definitely the reason was like Rabbi Yechanan, which again, as we just explained, that when we come into resolve for Ula, that it's really a kinyan damim, it's just a misalei shchicha. Okay, now we start a new discussion on this halacha of chalipin that we're discussing. So it says the Gemara, b'ma koinen. How does the kinyan of chalipin work? The pasuk in Rus is which is the source of this halacha says Shalaf Ishna Alai. The man took over his shoe and he gave it to him, and that's how Boaz acquired the legacy of Rus. Who took off the shoe and gave it to whom? So it's machlekes. Rav Amar b'Kelev Shalkaina. Rav says that it was with the vessels of the buyer. The buyer gives to the seller. In this case, Boaz was the buyer, and he gave to the other person this plain almaini. Because it's preferable for the buyer that the seller should acquire what the vessel is giving him, so that he should be confident and decide, he's gratified. In exchange, he's going to grant him the item. So that's how chalipin works, according to Rav. But Levi Amri says, no, but Kelev Shamakna. It's the other way around. It's the seller who gives the buyer a vessel. Like we want to say later on. The Gemara doesn't tell us yet. The Gemara hints that we're going to tell you something later on. But it's with the Kelev Shel Makna, which as Taisa says, Dafka the Kelev Shel Makna, and not the Kelev of the Kaina. Now, says the Gemara, Amalei Rav Hunim and the Skartel Rav, he says, Levi Daman B'Kelev Shel Makna. So the Gemara has an interesting question. According to Levi, that says that it's the seller who gives the buyer this kerchief. And that's how the buyer acquires whatever it is that he's giving him. But it could come out the following interesting problem. If let's say someone's giving his friend a piece of property, with a king of a sudder, and the receiver of the gift is taking the kerchief from the giver, and then he's acquiring the property through the kerchief. By drawing the kerchief, he's acquiring the property. So it comes out the property is coming through the shirt or the kerchief, whatever it is. Now, imkain, if that's the case, this would be qualified as havalei nechasim shesh l'machrayis, that you're acquiring property, karka, which is considered the items that have insurance because it's always there. V'niknim im nechasim shesh l'machrayis, and you're acquiring it through metaltlin by doing mashicha, which is a kinyan of metaltlin, and there's not a kinyan of a karka. You're acquiring karka through the metaltlin. Now, the thing is, v'nan ipchatinan. Mishnah Masechet Kedushin says it actually works the other way around. The Mishnah says nechasim shesh l'machrayis. Metaltlin are nicknamed im nechasim shesh machrayis, with a kin of agav, that when you acquire the property and you do a kinyan that only works for property and not for metaltlin, let's say you do kesef shtar or chazaka, by doing the kinyan on the karka, agav that you acquire the metaltlin. But you're telling me if it's Bekel Shemak, you're doing the exact opposite. Through the kinyan of the metaltlin, you're acquiring the karka. But the Mishnah Kedusha says it's the exact opposite. So Amalei said to him, if Levi would have been here, have a mapik la'apach pulsi denura. He would have taken out of your face sparks of light. Meaning it's a terminology of excommunication that you would suspect him of such a question. He says, Misavr, do you think that he was telling him a kinyan of agav, which means through the mashicha of the glima of the vessel that he's acquired him through mashicha? That's a maknile. He's transferring the karka with the kli? No. This is chalipin. Chalipin is a transfer. How would that even make sense? That's not a transfer. He's giving him one thing and through that giving him another thing. It's not transferring. It's not a he's giving him and he's giving him. That would be him giving him two different things. You're missing the whole point. No. It's as if the buyer is giving the seller something else in place of the property that he's getting. Well, what's he giving him? I thought the makna is giving him a keli. No, says the Gemara, the pleasure that the seller is getting, that when he gives it to the receiver, that he takes from him that pen or that kerchief, that he considers it significant to receive from him a gift. It's pleasing to him as if the receiver gave a huge gift to the seller, and therefore gamav aknile. Therefore, he's confident, and then he gives him the piece of property. So therefore, it's not agav. It's not. You're right. Agav doesn't work. Karka through metaltlin. It's metaltlin through karka. But that's not what's happening over here. It's not that because he's giving him the kerchief, that's how he's acquiring the karka, because that wouldn't be chalipin. It's the fact that you took from me that kerchief. You're doing me such a favor. You gave me that favor. Now I'm going to give you the karka. That's how the kingdom of chalipin works according to Levi. Now the Gemara actually says it's ketano. It's actually machlekes tanoim. This machlekes Rabbi Levi, because the pasuk in Ruth says this is what it always was in Klal Yisrael al geula v'tamucha, on the redemption and on the exchange. L'kaim kol davar to validate everything. Sholav ishnolav and nasler eyu. The man took up a shoe and he gave it to his friend. So the Gemara explains these words geula when the pasuk says that the word geula zu mechira, which is, Rashi say it differently. Rashi says that if someone sells a full-fledged sale with money and he doesn't receive the money and he's coming to validate the sale through a kinyan, that's what it means, geula. And when it says, and how do we know geula is a mechira? Because it says a pasuk in Yikra, lo yigoil, which discusses exactly which pasuk this is, but it's by Meister Behema, and so you see that geula is mechira, like it says lo yigoil v'lo yimacher in the pasuk. So you see that geula refers to mechira, and which Rabbeinu Tam explains that according to Rabbi Yechon that would mean with kesef, according to Shlokish it would mean meshicha, and but that's the source of geula. When it says in the pasuk timur in exchange, zuchalipin, which is that one guy exchanges one vessel for an opposite type of an object, which Taisa explains would mean, let's say, if it's shava b'shava, from equal amounts, according to everyone, that would work even by peri. Like it says in the pasuk in Vayikra, don't exchange it, I say, and don't exchange. Another terminology, but you see that timura means like an exchange, like chalipin. And when the pasuk continues, l'kaim kol davar, to validate all things, shalaf ishnalai, the man takes off his shoe, and nasl gives it to his ren. That's the question. Mi nasan lami, who gave the shoe to who? That's a machlekes, and that's a machlekes Rav and Levi. Either it's Boaz nasan l'gayil, either it's Boaz who was buying the estate, gave it to the appropriate redeemer, which is like Rav, that it's the kaina who gives it's the kelev shel kaina. Rabbi Yehuda says no, it's the gayil nasan l'Boaz. That plain almayni, he's the one who gave his shoe to Boaz, which is the kelev shel makna, and that's how Boaz went and acquired the estate. So that's a machlekes. Which way does it go? Now, continuing also on this theme, Tana, we learned in the Braisa, koinin bekli, you could acquire with a vessel for chalipin, afapi she'ein by shava pruta, even though it's not even worth a pruta. Then for chalipin, it doesn't have to have a monetary value. Place discusses why not. Generally, when it says the word v'nasan, it usually means it has to have a shava pruta, and here it says v'nasan l're'eyu. So he says that that's only when it's like a tashlumin. But over here, when you're giving the shoe, not necessarily does it have to be worth even a pruta. But Amr Rav Nachman, he qualifies this teaching. He says, Loishon, we didn't learn that you can acquire with a kinyan, ela bekli. But that's only, like the Bryce is saying, if it's a vessel. Av beperi, but regarding, again, peri doesn't mean specifically produce. It means anything that's not a kli. Then loy, then it's not going to work. Even if it's worth a lot, it will not work as a kinyan of chalipin. Has to be at least a kli. Rav Sheshes says, no, afila beperis. And we quoted this on the previous stuff, that even if it's non-keli, but if it's worth a pruta, then it's going to work as a kinyan of chalipin. So it says, my time Rav Nachman, what's the reason of Rav Nachman that he says it has to be a kli? Because Amakar, the pasuk says, naloi, his shoe. Nalin, midachin, a shoe is a kli. So if you're going to the biblical paradigm, it would seem it has to be something like a shoe, but nothing else. It says, my time Rav Sheshes, what's the reason of Rav Sheshes? Amakar says, no, it says, l'kaim kol davar, to validate it with all things, which is even not a kli. It says, Rav Nachman except l'kaim davar. What does Rav Nachman do? It says to validate all things. Seemingly, it doesn't have to be just a shoe. He says, no, ha'u l'kaim kol davar. That means to say that to validate all things of geula and tumura, deniknim biminal, that it could be acquired with the shoe, but what you're doing the kinyan with has to be like a shoe, like a kli. But then you could acquire all types of things with that kli. Rav Sheshes not makes him now. What does Rav Sheshes do with the shoe? It says a shoe. It sounds like it has to be a kli. Rav Sheshes says no. From that you learn that man nali davar masum, just like a shoe is a complete item. I've called davar masum. It just has to mean that it has to be a complete item, but it doesn't have to be dafka a kli. It's just lafuki chatzirim and chatzi egers delight. It's coming through. Let's say half of a pomegranate, half of a nut. That's not a complete item. That's what's being excluded from the halacha of chalipin. Now, Amr Rav Sheshes, Beri Davidi. Yeah. It would be full, exactly. Then it would work. Like peri, according to that madama, it doesn't have to be a kli. That would work. Just when it's not a double shalom, that's what you're learning from now. Now, Amr Rav Sheshes, Beri Davidi says. Now, the Gemara puts together a lot of the halachas by saying, "Kaman kasvina ha'idna." According to whom do we write now? When they make the shtar, they would write a document for the king of Suda that we're going to do. They write a document and they write like this. And the words are "V'kenina minei," that I acquired from him b'mana with a vessel, the kosher l'mekanyabe that's valid to acquire it from him with, that's what they would write. So the Gemara is going to take apart every single word to show that it's saying a halacha. When it says b'mana, that's lafukim Rav Sheshes that we just mentioned a moment ago. Dama kind of beperis. He says the kinyan does not have to be with a kli; it could even be a peris. No, the word that we say b'mana is obviously indicating that it has to be a vessel and not a non-vessel. The next word, the kosher, what does it mean? A vessel that is valid, that's to do a kinyan with. That's lafukim edishmul. Dama that he says kain as you continue them beis b'maroika. Which machlik is Rashi, and this is exactly what it is. Rashi says a vessel that's made from animal dung, which is not kosher, it's not appropriate, and therefore that's excluding from that halacha of Shmuel, that you cannot use mereika. And the next word of lemekanya, which sounds like to acquire with and not to transfer with. Obviously, it's the kalim of the kaina. That's what the buyer is saying. I went and used this chalipin with this vessel to acquire with, because he's using his vessel to give it to the seller. Lafukum Levi. That's going from Levi done by Caleb Shamakna, that it says that it's done with the vessels of the seller, which as Taisa says, it does sound like that here from the halacha would be like Rav. Kamashman, that's in Lemekanya, V'lo Laknuye, that it's to buy with and not to sell with. And the last word bay, with it, that sounds like a miyad. With it and not with something else. So what does that come to exclude? So Papa Amay says Lemudei Matbeya, as that madama, as we mentioned, it's coming to exclude that you cannot do chalipin with money. Rav Zvid, Vitim Rav Ashim, it says no, Lemuti Isura no. It's coming to exclude something that's forbidden to have benefit from it. Isura no cannot be used to effectuate a chalipin. That's one version. Ikadam, and those say a different version that bay with it. The last word, Amar Papa Lemuti Lematbeya. That's what's coming to exclude money. And the kosher, that when we said that it's a vessel that's kosher. That's the muti Yisrael now. That's coming to exclude Yisrael now. Of Marika that we had used originally to exclude from the word the kosher, lo yitzrich, you don't need to say there's not kaina because that would be obvious. And again, that's the different interpretations of what are the words of the document that they would write. Each word coming to tell us what it's coming to exclude regarding the halacha of chalipin. Now the Mishnah had said that asimon, our Mishnah kept on saying different cases of what's the mo'is and what's the mekach. And one case was asimon that when the guy does mashicha on the asimon, that will acquire the money, but the money will not acquire the asimon. So it says my asimon. So Marav, he says mois hanitanis besimon lebeis hamerchatz. Like the word asimon is the word simon. It's money that's given as a sign for the bathhouse, meaning the balan, the bathhouse attendant, would receive these token coins. A token means like a symbolic. From the one who is in charge for the bathing in the bathhouse to know how many they are, and that's how much he had to warm up the waters and prepare the towels. And they would give like these inferior type of tokens, like you go play in arcades, like that. That's what asimon is. They're just these tokens that were used in the bathhouse. The Gemara says Mesa, the Gemara rejects this because it's learned in the Braisa, unrelated halacha. But it says, we know that Ma'aseh produce you could deconsecrate onto money and bring that money up to Yerushalayim. The Braisa says you cannot deconsecrate the Ma'aseh Sheni on Asimon, and neither could you deconsecrate onto these monies, these inferior tokens that we use in the bathhouse. Obviously, it's not the same thing because it's two different cases. And maybe you're going to say, as Taisa explains, maybe you won't have the vav over there. And actually, it's one thing. It's explaining. It's saying you cannot deconsecrate on asimon, which is the money that's given to the bathhouse attendant. Says but we didn't learn a Bryce like this because the Bryce actually clearly differentiates. The Bryce says, Deisa says actually you could deconsecrate the Ma'aseh Sheni on asimon. But they say no, you cannot deconsecrate. And B'Shavin they both agree that you cannot deconsecrate on the money that's given as a sign for the bathhouse attendant, for the tokens. No, because Ma'aseh Sheni has to be on money, dafka. But no, Sata Kesa Biyad, it has to be on money. Can't be on another. Yeah, money, exactly. Exactly, not on something that's worth value. Exactly. So that's what's saying that we see it's clearly two different things because Reb Doisa is being machalik between Asimon and Mois and the Tons Lebeis HaMerchatz. So the Gemara says you're right. Allah Amar Rabbi Yechon says Ma'asimon, it's pulsa. Pulsa means that it's lacking form. It's an unminted coin. And these coins are considered merchandise. And so performing a Mashiach on these coins, that affects the kinyan, while taking the regular currency does not. And the Gemara explains, Rabbi Yechon goes according to his reasoning. Because Amr B'Yechanan, he said, Reb Deisa Reb Yishmael Amr Daber Echad. What does that mean? So Reb Deisa Hodamar. So Reb Deisa is like we just mentioned, that he said that you can be Mechal Ma'aser Sheni on Asimon that's lacking a form, and Reb Yishmael Mahi, where do you see Reb Yishmael holds the same thing, that a coin lacking a form would still be considered as currency, because the time to learn the Brisa. Pas says in the Varm regarding this pasuk of redeeming Ma'aser Sheni, it says V'tzarta kesef b'yadecha. You're going to wrap the money in your hand. You're going to bring it up to Yerushalayim. Now the first time it says l'Rabbas called davar netzabiyad. Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg holds that includes anything that's wrapped up in your hand that could be used to go ahead and deconsecrate your Ma'aser Sheni produce. Rabbi Kiva may disagree. He says no. L'Rabbas called davar shesh l'betzura. It comes to include anything that has a form. So as Rashi explains, from the fact that Rabbi Yechanan had said that Rabbi Shmuel is like Rabbi Deisa, who disagrees on something that does not have a tzura, to permit chil on it, that Rabbi Yechanan is saying, he's saying like Rabbi Deisa. Obviously Rabbi Yechanan is saying that Asimon of Rabbi Deisa is something that does not have a tzura, because that's exactly what Rabbi Shmuel, who disagrees with Rabbi Kiva, because Rabbi Kiva says it has to have a tzura. Shmuel is not saying that, doesn't have to have a tzura. So Rabbi Shmuel that holds something that does not have a tzura works, and Rabbi Yechanan is saying that Rabbi Deisa says the same thing on Asimon. Obviously, Asimon is something that does not have a tzura, and then there's Rabbi Yechanan Tamei that is explaining that an Asimon is something that's an unminted coin, and that you see that same idea, Rabbi Deisa and Rabbi Shmuel. Now, the Mishnah had explained Ketzad. So, how do we illustrate this halacha of chalipin, not of chalipin, of Meshicha, of the Paris, and not of the mois, which was really the perik hazav, koines akesa versus akesa, any hazav. That was the main idea, because kesef is the mois and hazav is the product. So that's what the Mishnah explained. Mashachem in the Paris. If let's say the guy did mashiach on the produce, on the product, on the merchandise, didn't give the money. Okay, in you can't back out anymore, etc. Because again, the primary thing is mashiach on the product and not on the money, because mois are not koines. So here's where the Gemara finally explains this machlekes we've already been mentioning a few times. Amr Rabbi Yechanan. He says the truth is, Dvar Torah, according to biblical law, mo'is kindness. Really, money does acquire. So why were we saying in our Mishnah all throughout that only Meshicha kind, only the drawing of the product acquires, but not the money? That's a gezerah. It's rabbinic decree. Because maybe you're going to pay for the product, but you don't have your van that day. You only came in your car. You can't take the product; it's too big. It doesn't fit in your car. So the guy's it's up in the attic in the guy's storehouse, and there's going to be a fire. So he's going to say, "Look, your stuff burnt up because you acquired already. It's yours. We wanted to avoid such a situation." So he said, "No. You don't acquire by just giving money." Now, says the Gemara, first the Gemara has a technical question. The Gemara says, at the end of the day, man deshaded lake, whoever made the fire, Bava Metzia Daf is going to have to pay anyway. Who cares that it's going to burn? If whoever lit the fire will have to pay. So the Gemara said, no. It's a decree, to like no one lit the fire. Maybe there is a habit to have a fire beyond anyone's control. And then, imuk bislu b'shuse, if you're going to put in the possession of the seller, meaning we're going to say that the money did not acquire it yet, master nafshi, tarach hamatzal, he's going to be moistened nefesh, he's going to put his life at risk to go and save it. And because it affects him, because it's his, but if not, he's not going to put an effort to try to go ahead and save it. Which Taisa brings the Maskal Nissa for an interesting question from the Rivan. He says, why did the Chum have to remove the biblical kinyan of Mois? Why didn't they just institute that you need both money and Meshicha? So says the Rivan that if Meshicha itself would not acquire, so then the buyer would tell the seller that your wheat got burnt in my attic. Because if he does Meshicha and he didn't pay yet, the other way around, the guy gave him credit. He said, here, you take it, you'll pay me later. And it burns in his attic, he's going to tell the seller, your wheat got burnt. So therefore, they said that no, Meshicha itself will be kinder and not Mois. Not that both. So that's interesting. Teretz from the Rivan. Now, this is the opinion of Rabbi Yechanan. That biblically really works. It's a rabbinic decree of maybe that the seller is not going to be so invested to save the wheat of the buyer. Now, Rish Lakish, he says that no, Meshicha mufaresh is minat Torah. It's actually not true. Biblically, the Torah tells us you have to do Meshicha. Says, my tongue is like, what's the reason of Rish Lakish? Because I'm a it's a pasuk Vayikra. The pasuk says in Vayikra, says when you're going to sell something to your friend or you're going to buy from your friend. So it says, when you're going to sell a sold item to your friend, like you're going to buy it from your friend. So it talks about over there, don't defraud the other person. But one thing you see is that when it's talking about a kinyan, is duba nikna miyad liyad. It has to be something that's bought from hand to hand, which is meshicha. It says you take it from his hand. That's taking the bought product. Rabbi says no, miyad from hand is limute karka. It's coming to exclude property which doesn't go from hand to hand, and it's just telling you the context of the pasuk. The less bayna that there's no halacha bayna, because that's what the pasuk is saying. It said al toina ish asachav. It's going on price fraud. Where since it's not going from hand to hand, you're right. The halacha is there's no ayna on real estate. You could charge more than a sixth of what its real value is. Bershlaka, she would tell you, you're right. But in Cain, if that's the case, lift of the pasuk should have written when you're going to sell an item from the hand of your friend. Al toinu, don't defraud him. So the question is, oikana lamali. Why does the Torah say the word oikana? The reason why it says oikana is to put the word kinyan near the word miyad, from the hand, to say that the kinyan doesn't happen until it goes from the hand to hand. Obviously, the pasuk is also indicating this idea of mashicha. He says, no, it's not true. What does he do with oikana? It's necessary to teach you, as we learned in the following brisa. The pasuk says, when you're going to sell an item, al toinu, don't defraud. I would only know that when the seller is defrauding the buyer. How do you know if the seller got defrauded? That he undersold it. It says in the pasuk, oikana, or if he's buying al tainu, he should not defraud the seller. So oikana also has a purpose, not just to compare it to miyad. But Shlaka, she says no tartigamane. He learns out both. He learns out the oina of the meicher from oikana al tainu. But as Rashi explains in the Masal Tarti, and he learns out meshicha from the fact that the word miyad is near the word kinyan, and it's not near the word memker. Why is it specifically like that? To learn that a kinyan is only when it's miyad liyad, when there's meshicha, and it will not work just with money. So this machlekes, biblically, what's the halacha? Is mois kindness like Rabbi Yechanan, and it's only gzeir d'Rabbanan, or like Rish Lakish says, no, the Torah is telling you, clearly only meshicha works. So the Gemara asks on Rish Lakish, Nan, we learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon Omer, he said, and he disagrees with the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan had said that when the guy gives money, so both of them can back out, because the kinyan didn't happen yet. Shimon disagreed in our Mishnah. He says, no, the only one who could back out is the seller. And he says, whoever has the money in his possession, he has the upper hand, as the Gemara explains. Only the seller can back out. Once the buyer gave the money, he cannot back out. So the Gemara says, wait a second. If you understand from a biblical standpoint, that, like Rabbi Yechanan had said, that money acquires, and Mashiach is only rabbinic takana. Okay, makes sense. That's why the seller could back out, but the buyer cannot back out. Meaning, Reb Shimon's coming to say, and Rashi says the word dayenu, very appropriate. He says, it's enough if we're going to say that the seller could back out, because when you make it in his possession that he could back out, if it's going to go up in price, he'll be meiser nefesh to save it. He's going to say, look, I can still make money off it, because if it goes up, I could back out. But the buyer can't back out, because biblically the money acquires. We're only invested in having the seller be able to back out. Which Taisus asks on that. He says that's bizarre. You're going to make a whole takana for a guy who's a Rasha, a guy who wants to make money off the buyer, who backing out, he would have to be over on a mishapara. So Taisus says, yeah, because obviously the whole takana is only for people that are inappropriate people, that they'll leave the produce of their friends to let it burn. So Taisus says, obviously we're not talking about such an upstanding person anyway. So that would make sense if you hold like Rabbi Yechanan. But if you hold like Rish Lakish, the mois in the kindness, the money does not acquire at all. So I don't understand. The kechnam al hadbe. So the buyer should also be able to back out. There's no kinyan here. Why should only the seller be able to back out? So Rish Lakish, he says, you're right. I was not talking in Reb Shimon. Reb Shimon, you're right. He holds Meshicha is rabbinic takana. Reb Shimon clearly is like Rabbi Yechanan. I was saying, according to Rabbanan, that they say the lekech could also back out. Why could the lekech back out? Because manas does not acquire at all. So the Gemara actually takes it one step further. It says, wait a second. So the contrary. According to Rish Lakish, that he says, according to Rabbanan, that Mashiach is Deirais, is a biblical halacha, and Mois does not work at all. That's the difference between that's what Rabbanan. In other words, they're disagreeing about in this principle itself. Rabbanan hold Mashiach is Deirais, so therefore it doesn't make a difference the seller or the buyer. They could both back out, because if Mashiach wasn't done yet on the product, just money was given, nothing was done. Shimon, on the other hand, holds no Mashiach is to come to Rabbanan. so that we want the seller to put in the effort. So therefore, the seller is where the rabbinic injunction would make sense, and not for the buyer. But Rabbi Yochanan that he says according to Rabbanan also Mashiach is according to Rabbanan. So Ma'ikeh ben Shimon Rabbanan. In other words, what are they disagreeing about? Why would Reb Shimon allow only the seller and Rabbanan allow even the lekeach? Well, what's the difference? They both hold that it's a takana Rabbanan. Why would you let it for the buyer according to Rabbanan? Says the Gemara, Rav Chizda, the difference between them is Rav Chizda's halacha. Because Rav Chizda, he says, just like they instituted Mashiach for the sellers, in other words, that the seller could back out as long as Mashiach of Lekech was not done. Says Rav Chizda, yes, that's the same reason they instituted that Mashiach is required to allow the buyer to back out, because that same takana of Nisr Chetecha. Because Rashi explains, the bottom Rashi says, all the more so. If you're going to say that the buyer could also back out, oh boy, the seller's going to suddenly go and put in the effort to save it from the fire. Because if the buyer's walking down the street and he sees there's a fire in the seller's house, he's going to say, I'm backing out. So the seller's definitely going to go to try and save it because he knows the buyer's going to back out. And the Gemara later on, the Memtesma Beis brings this, that such a case, or Rav Chizda, the guy gave money for a donkey and he hears that suddenly the governor wanted to take it away and he's backing out. Oh, so therefore, that's the machlekes. Shimon Leslie Rav Chizda. He doesn't hold the Rav Chizda's halachas. Therefore, we don't need the buyer to be able to back out, and therefore it's only applicable really for the seller. The Rabbanis, Rav Chizda, they hold that halacha of Rav Chizda that we want the buyer to be able to back out. Then for sure the seller is going to go ahead and save it from the fire. Now the Gemara asks, Tznan, the Gemara asks under Shlokish from our Mishnah. The Mishnah said, but they said that although if money was given, you're right, the halacha is that a person could back out, but they said Misha Parma Darhamabel, whoever punished from the generation of the flood, who asli pagam and Misha inam b'dibure, they're going to punish from whoever doesn't stand on the word that he gave that he's going to buy the item. So the Gemara says like this: yeah, maybe you say mois kindness that really money acquires sham hachi kai ba'avel. So it makes sense why there's an aval, but you're going to get punished because although rabbinically we said it's not a kinyan until Mashiach, but biblically really a kinyan happened, and you're backing out, that should be punishable. But if you hold the Grish Lakish, the money doesn't acquire at all. Nothing was done. So my koi ba'avel. So what's the but? Why are you getting punished from Mishapara? Says because of your word. You gave a word. Says giving a word, you're going to get punished more. But when the bride says, although they said that a talus, which is the object, could acquire the golden coin. The ain't din of kind of talus, but the golden coin does not acquire the talus, as Rashi explains that in contrast to Paris, gold is definitely going to be considered as the money. So the money does not acquire, but the object does acquire. But Makamalkam, however, in other words, even though that there will be punishment that's going to come for backing out, but kach halacha, that's the halacha that the court cannot stop him. That you're right, he could back out if only money was given. But they said, Misha Par Ma'anshadar Amabel, whoever punished from the generation of the flood, Ma'anshadar flood from the generation of the dispersion, and from Sidayim V'Amayr, Mitzrayim B'Yam, and the Egyptians by the sea, who also Lipacham and Misha Inam he's going to punish someone who does not stand by his word. Now, but one more halacha, and this is what's critical to differentiate. Now, whoever did business just with words, he gave a word. No kinyan has happened. Whoever backs out, the sages, the spirit of the sage are not pleased with such a person. They're not pleased with such a person. They don't appreciate such a person who backs out of his word. Now, but Rava says, and as Taisa explains, he's really just coming to clarify that anu ein lanu, we don't have any other curse of such a person. Just that the sages' spirit are not pleased with him. They just don't like him. Meaning he's just coming to clarify there's no mishapara. But there's no mishapara. Didn't you say that backing out of your word creates a mishapara? So why, if someone's nice dvarim, is there no mishapara? Says the Gemara, no. Dvarim vikabadai mois. If a guy gave his word and he also gave money, you're right. Although according to Rish Lakish, no kinyan happened over here, but that's koi ba'avel. That's already, already some action was done over here. It's not just word. You already gave money, but you're right. Mois on the biblical level, according to Rish Lakish, is not koin at all. And the nafkamina says Rashi would be regarding, let's say, prohibitory law. Let's say someone was makadosh isha with. According to Rabbi Yochanan, that Moses kindness would it would be a kedushin, because Midirai says a kinyan and it would be his. According to Shlakish, it wouldn't be a kedushin. But just words without money, that's for saying there's not going to be even the mishapar. It's just going to be ein ruchacham noichman. So the difference between, you're right, it's not a kinyan. You could back out, but the aval mishapara will be only mois with devarim, and just devarim itself will just be ein ruchacham noichman. Thank you to any time. Those things.